When an 11-year-old girl shuffles into class with a bruise that looks suspiciously like a handprint, her substitute teacher almost writes it off as an ordinary playground mishap. But then the child glances up, and in the depth of her fearful eyes, the teacher senses a secret that could unravel a lifetime of hidden pain. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe in the power of compassion, hit that like button and subscribe for more. It is Ms. Parker's first morning as a long-term substitute at Woodbridge Elementary, a modest school in a small town that looks quaint on the surface. The hallways are lined with brightly colored murals of smiling suns and cartoon animals, and the smell of fresh crayons and pencil shavings lingers in the air. She has arrived early, straightening the name tags on the desks and adjusting the warm-up exercises on the chalkboard. Ms. Parker has taught for decades, though she calls herself semi-retired. Truthfully, the hush of her empty house had started to feel too lonely. When she heard Mrs. Rogers was taking maternity leave, Ms. Parker volunteered to substitute, eager to be among children again. She expects a quiet morning of introductions and new routines. Once the bell rings, kids trickle in, some laughing, some yawning. She greets them warmly, remembering how nerves can flare on the first day with a new teacher. Most smile back, but there is one child who slips in without a word, her posture tense and eyes fixed on the floor. She chooses a seat at the farthest corner, hugging her backpack. The bruise on her wrist is the size of a thumbprint, purple and green around the edges, as though someone grabbed her too hard. Miss Parker notices it immediately, but it is the girl's expression, or lack thereof, that truly sets alarm bells ringing. She is so withdrawn, so guarded, that Miss Parker's heart squeezes. There is a sense of profound sorrow hanging around this child, whose hair looks unwashed and whose clothes are rumpled, as if she dressed herself in the dark. The name on the roster is Sarah, last name Denton, though Miss Parker notes with mild confusion that some records list Thompson as well. She begins the class, softly introducing herself, giving her background as a long-time educator who is here to fill in for Mrs. Rogers. She speaks about her love of reading and art, about how she hopes they can have some fun with projects and short stories. Some of the children perk up, clearly curious about this new teacher. Sarah, however, remains stoic, her face turned toward the window as though longing to be anywhere else. By mid-morning, Miss Parker starts a simple icebreaker. Each student stands, shares their name, and mentions an activity they enjoy. It goes smoothly until it is Sarah's turn. The children wait expectantly. Sarah hesitates, glances at Miss Parker, then mutters, "Sarah, I like to draw," in a barely audible tone. She says nothing else, her eyes flicking around as though waiting to be scolded. Miss Parker smiles gently and doesn't push her further. At lunchtime, Miss Parker watches the children file out to the cafeteria. She notices Sarah trailing behind the group, head down, arms crossed protectively over her chest. After finishing her brief lunch, Miss Parker decides to wander around the cafeteria to get a feel for her new students' personalities. She sees clusters of kids chatting animatedly about new video games or the next soccer match. But Sarah sits alone at the far corner, poking half-heartedly at a peanut butter sandwich. No one seems to join her. Miss Parker's instincts warn her that this level of isolation is not accidental. Later that day, Miss Parker crosses paths with the school counselor, Mr. Lee, in the hallway. She decides to mention her concerns. He is a tall man, wearing glasses that slip down his nose every few seconds. He has a reputation for kindness, always keeping a candy jar on his desk for kids who need a pick-me-up. When Ms. Parker brings up Sarah and the bruise on her wrist, he nods solemnly. "Sarah Denton," Mr. Lee says, rubbing his chin. She's in the care of her aunt, Mildred Reynolds. The child's parents died in a car crash about a year ago. Since then, Sarah's been a reclusive. I've tried to talk to her, but she barely says anything. Her aunt never picks up the phone when I call, and when I try to visit, she just told me Sarah was doing fine and closed the door. Ms. Parker feels a flutter of alarm. Is there any official record of abuse? Mr. Lee exhales. Nothing solid. There are rumors. Bruises, neighbors hearing the girl cry, but it's all unconfirmed. Social services visited once, but they found no proof. Mildred claimed Sarah was clumsy, always bumping into things. Ms. Parker's mind races. She recalls the apprehensive look in Sarah's eyes and wonders if it could truly be just clumsiness. "I'll keep an eye on her," Ms. Parker says gently. She seems so withdrawn. Mr. Lee presses his lips together. "Thank you. If you see anything else concerning, let me know." Over the following week, Ms. Parker pays closer attention to Sarah, noticing more signs that something is amiss. There is the way Sarah flinches if Ms. Parker moves too quickly, as if expecting to be struck. There is the limp she develops one day, offering a vague explanation about falling off her bike. Ms. Parker discreetly checks her knee, finding a half-healed scrape that looks too deep to be from a simple stumble. Sarah's clothes grow more disheveled each day, her hair more tangled, and her eyes perpetually ringed with exhaustion. The child rarely speaks unless prompted. Even then, she responds with the bare minimum. Ms. Parker attempts small kindnesses, like offering extra pencils and coloring supplies, or inviting Sarah to read quietly after finishing her classwork. Sarah's passion for drawing reveals itself in the margins of her worksheets. Small sketches of distorted faces, shadowy figures looming over a smaller silhouette. More than once, Ms. Parker's gaze catches those haunting images, and each time, her concern deepens. During recess, Ms. Parker takes a short walk around the playground. She spots Sarah crouched in a corner of the courtyard, sketchbook perched on her knees. Approaching softly, Ms. Parker peers at the page. It shows a child curled up in a dark room, with long, claw-like hands reaching through a locked door. Ms. Parker's stomach knots. She forces her voice to be gentle. "Sarah, are you okay?" she asks. Sarah snaps the sketchbook shut, breathing raggedly. "I'm fine," she says. Then she bolts away, leaving Ms. Parker feeling helpless. That evening, Ms. Parker cannot shake her worry. She sits at home, sipping tea in her small living room, thinking of how haunted Sarah looked. It would be irresponsible to jump to conclusions, but her instincts are shouting that this child is in trouble. She decides to talk to Mr. Lee again the next day, maybe push for another visit from social services. But the next morning, Sarah arrives with a fresh bruise on her forearm, shaped disturbingly like a handprint. This time, Ms. Parker cannot hold back. She asks Sarah to step aside after class, bringing her to a quiet corner of the hallway. "Sarah," she says softly, "that mark on your arm, did someone hurt you?" Sarah's face pales. She shakes her head fervently. "I fell," she whispers. "I tripped and fell against the door." Ms. Parker doesn't believe it for a second. She hesitates, torn between comforting Sarah and prying for more information. "If anything is happening at home, anything you want to talk about, I'm here to help," she offers. Sarah's hands tremble. She glances down, refusing to meet Ms. Parker's gaze. "Nothing's happening," she insists. "I just fell. Please, can I go?" Ms. Parker steps aside, heart heavy. She watches Sarah hurry down the hall, shoulders rigid with tension. Ms. Parker knows she must act, but she also knows that calling child services without concrete evidence could backfire, especially if Sarah denies the abuse. Still, she calls the nurse to check Sarah's bruise. The nurse quietly confides that she shares Ms. Parker's concern and notes that the shape and location of the bruise do not match a typical accidental bump. That day, Ms. Parker finishes her classes feeling a mixture of dread and determination. She tracks down Mr. Lee and relays what she has observed. He nods gravely, pushing his sliding glasses back up his nose. "I think we need to report it," he says. "We might not have definitive proof, but a new bruise shaped like a handprint? We can't ignore that." Ms. Parker agrees. They make the call to social services, providing details. The official on the other end listens carefully, but Ms. Parker can sense the reservations. They have only bruises and minimal statements from Sarah herself. Still, the official assures them they will investigate promptly. The next day, A social worker visits Aunt Mildred's home unannounced. Sarah at school looks visibly agitated. During a reading session, she keeps glancing at the clock, biting her nails. Ms. Parker approaches her gently. "Is everything all right?" she asks. Sarah stares at the clock again, tears welling in her eyes. "They're at my house, aren't they?" she mumbles. "They'll make it worse." Ms. Parker's heart clenches. "Sarah, no one wants to make things worse. We just want you to be safe." Terror flits across Sarah's features. She slams her book shut and abruptly leaves her seat. Ms. Parker calls her name, but Sarah runs out of the classroom. Alarmed, Ms. Parker signals Mr. Lee, and they begin searching the school. The sense of urgency intensifies as the minutes tick by. They ask other students, check the bathrooms, even peer outside. Finally, they discover Sarah huddled in a supply closet, trembling. "Sarah," Ms. Parker says softly, kneeling beside the terrified girl. "Please come out. No one is angry with you." Sarah shakes her head. "She'll be furious," she whispers, tears streaking down her face. "I told you not to call them. I told you." Ms. Parker extends a hand, voice shaking with empathy. "I'm sorry," she says. "We just want to protect you." Sarah stares at the outstretched hand. After a long moment, she creeps forward, allowing Miss Parker to gently pull her into an embrace. "I don't want them to make me leave," Sarah says in a quivering voice. "They'll put me in some strange house far away, and no one will want me." Miss Parker's eyes tear up. "Oh, sweetheart, that's not going to happen. We're trying to help you, not send you away." Mr. Lee, kneeling beside them, speaks in a gentle tone. "Sarah, we have to make sure you're safe. You don't deserve to be hurt." Sarah clams up again, hugging her knees to her chest. It takes another hour before she is calm enough to return to class. By then, Ms. Parker has missed half her teaching schedule, but she doesn't care. She can't leave this child in such distress. Later that afternoon, Ms. Parker learns that the social worker's visit yielded no definitive evidence. Aunt Mildred claimed Sarah simply bruises easily and is prone to exaggeration. The house appeared tidy enough, with no visible signs of violence. With Sarah denying abuse, the social worker cannot remove her from the home based on suspicion alone. Ms. Parker sits with Mr. Lee in his small office, shoulders slumped. "I feel like we did the right thing, but it's not enough," she says. Sarah is obviously terrified. "I can't stand the thought of her going home to more potential harm." Mr. Lee sighs, running a hand through his hair. "I know. We'll keep documenting everything. And we'll keep trying to earn Sarah's trust." In the days that follow, Sarah grows even more withdrawn. She shows up late, claiming she missed the bus. She avoids eye contact with Ms. Parker, as if blaming her for the social services visit. Then she arrives one morning pale and trembling, refusing to speak at all. Ms. Parker begs her to see the nurse again, but Sarah mumbles, "No. Just let me be." Ms. Parker glances at Mr. Lee in passing, sees the same worry etched on his face. They both suspect something dire is unfolding, but they are bound by the system's rules. Without Sarah's cooperation, they are stuck in a heartbreaking limbo. Late one afternoon, Ms. Parker remains in her classroom, grading quizzes. She is about to leave when Mr. Lee pokes his head in, looking grim. "There's someone you should meet," he says. "A retired police officer, Harold Jennings. He used to be on the local force and has some insight into Sarah's parents' accident. He's outside in the hallway." Ms. Parker steps out, curiosity piqued. Jennings is a stout man with graying hair and sharp brown eyes. He greets Ms. Parker politely, then says, "I hear you're worried about Sarah Denton." Ms. Parker nods. "Yes. Do you know something about her parents' accident?" Jennings rubs his chin. "It was ruled a standard car crash, but some of us in the department suspected foul play. The father, Richard Denton, was a careful driver, no sign of substances. The road conditions weren't even that bad. But the investigation hit a dead end, and it stayed an accident on paper. Mildred Reynolds, the aunt, was among the last people to see them alive. She never gave a clear statement, Just said they left late at night and must have been tired. Ms. Parker's pulse quickens. Why suspect foul play? Jennings shrugs. Lots of hushed gossip in town. Some folks said there was tension over finances. Others claimed Mildred blamed Richard for something that happened when they were younger, never confirmed. But it was odd. The mother had a decent life insurance policy, and so did the father. Mildred ended up with the money, taking in Sarah. People thought it was convenient. Ms. Parker and Mr. Lee exchange a worried glance. This new information suggests that if Mildred's motivations were less than honorable, Sarah could be in deeper danger than they realized. What do we do with that suspicion? Ms. Parker asks softly. Jennings sighs. Not much without fresh evidence. But I wanted you to know the talk around town. If you see signs that Sarah might be abused, keep a record. And if Sarah mentions anything about the night her parents died, don't dismiss it. Ms. Parker thanks him, a pit of dread forming in her stomach. She pictures Sarah's haunted drawings, the bruises, her terror at the idea of an investigation. Could Aunt Mildred be threatening Sarah to keep secrets buried? That night, Miss Parker can barely sleep. She lies awake in bed, the hum of the ceiling fan doing little to calm her anxiety. She replays every conversation she's had with Sarah, scanning for missed clues. In the morning, she arrives at school determined to protect this fragile child, but also unsure how to proceed without driving Sarah into deeper fear. When Sarah appears in class that day, she is even more subdued, eyes rimmed with red as if she has been crying for hours. During an art period, Ms. Parker hovers nearby, hoping to encourage Sarah gently. Sarah's pencil glides across paper, forming dark lines that coalesce into a twisted shape, something monstrous overshadowing a small figure huddled in a corner. Ms. Parker kneels by her desk. That's quite intense, she says softly. Sarah startles, pressing a hand over the sketch. It's nothing, she mutters. Ms. Parker notices the tremble in Sarah's hand. You're very talented, Ms. Parker offers. I'd love to see more of your work. Sarah looks away, tears gathering in her eyes. No one cares, she whispers. Art doesn't fix anything. Ms. Parker's throat tightens. Sometimes, art can help us express things we can't say with words, she says. And I do care. For a moment, Sarah's gaze flickers with something like longing, but then she closes her sketchbook and scrambles away from the desk, retreating to a corner of the room. Ms. Parker watches her go, sorrow mingling with urgency. She needs to reach this child, but how? During Ms. Parker's lunch break, she talks with Mr. Lee again. I want to invite Sarah to stay after school, maybe say it's for an art project, Ms. Parker suggests. I can see if she'll open up in a more private setting. Mr. Lee nods. It's worth a try. Just be careful not to spook her. So Ms. Parker arranges it quietly, telling Sarah she's been selected for a special after-school art workshop. Sarah looks nervous, but she nods. That afternoon, as the other kids shuffle out to buses and carpools, Sarah lingers in the classroom, shoulders hunched. Miss Parker closes the door softly, grateful for the hush that settles. I thought maybe we could try some new painting techniques, Miss Parker says, opening a cupboard to reveal acrylic paints and blank canvases. You said you like to draw, but have you ever tried painting? Sarah's eyes dart toward the supplies, curiosity flickering in her gaze. Not really, she admits, hugging her arms around herself. Miss Parker sets out brushes and water cups. Pick any colors you like, she encourages. Sometimes painting is freeing. For a while, they work in silence, Miss Parker dabbing paint onto a small canvas to demonstrate blending, Sarah tentatively layering colors. The hush is broken only by the soft swish of bristles and the faint hum of the overhead lights. Eventually, Miss Parker breaks the stillness. Sarah, you've been carrying a lot of sadness. I can see it in your drawings, in your eyes. If there's anything you want to talk about, I promise to listen. Sarah doesn't respond at first, continuing to paint in short, harsh strokes of black and gray. Then, her shoulders begin to shake, tears dropping onto the canvas. She hates me, Sarah whispers, voice cracking. Ms. Parker's breath catches. She sets down her brush. Who, your aunt? Sarah nods, tears streaming down her cheeks. She says I'm the reason Mom and Dad are dead. She says I'm cursed, that bad things happen around me. She calls me worthless. Sometimes, when she's really mad, she locks me in my room and doesn't let me eat. She says it's to teach me a lesson. If I cry, she yells louder, tells me I should be grateful she's even letting me live there. Miss Parker's eyes brim with tears. She tries to keep her voice calm, gentle. Oh, Sarah, she murmurs. I'm so sorry. That's not right. None of that is your fault. Sarah's sobs deepen. If I ever tell anyone, she says she'll run away with me or do worse, she gasps. She told me if I speak to teachers, she'll blame me for everything and get me thrown in some home. I don't want to be sent away. I just want to be normal. Miss Parker's heart shatters hearing the raw pain in Sarah's words. She moves closer, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's back. For once, Sarah doesn't pull away. You deserve a safe home, Miss Parker says softly. You deserve to be cared for, not locked up or starved. We can help you, but we need to let the right people know what's happening. Sarah sniffles, eyes darting around with fear. She'll find out, she insists. She always does. Then she'll hurt me. Miss Parker hands Sarah a tissue, her own voice shaking with emotion. We won't let that happen, she says. We'll make sure you're protected. Sarah's shoulders slump as though a mountain of exhaustion weighs on her. She nods ever so slightly, though the dread in her eyes remains. Miss Parker holds her gently, letting the child's tears subside. Then she leads Sarah to the sink, helps her wash her paint-stained hands, and hands her a fresh canvas. Sometimes, it helps to paint what you want life to look like, Miss Parker suggests softly. Instead of painting what scares you, paint something that makes you feel safe. Sarah sniffles, picks up a brush, and selects a pale blue color. Ms. Parker steps away to give her space. She quietly wipes her own tears, overwhelmed by the confirmation of her worst fears. Sarah is not just being neglected, she is being emotionally and possibly physically abused. Ms. Parker resolves to call child services again, this time armed with a direct statement from Sarah. But she must handle it delicately. If Aunt Mildred catches wind too soon, she might vanish with the girl. As the afternoon deepens, Miss Parker notices Sarah's painting shift from gloomy strokes to lighter hues, soft blues, gentle yellows. She wonders if it's a reflection of the hope Sarah desperately needs. By the time they clean up, Miss Parker gently broaches the subject of telling Mr. Lee. We can do this together, she assures Sarah. He's on your side, I promise. Sarah's eyes fill with anxiety. I can't do it now, she pleads. Can you just let me think about it? I'm scared to go home. She'll be suspicious if I'm late. Ms. Parker nods, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. All right, tomorrow maybe? Sarah lowers her gaze. Yes. Tomorrow, she whispers. She packs her things and leaves. The next morning, Aunt Mildred storms into the school, face contorted with rage. Miss Parker is in the hallway chatting with a colleague when she hears footsteps and a sharp voice. Where's Sarah? Mildred demands, pointing an accusatory finger at Miss Parker. What lies have you been putting in her head? Ms. Parker struggles to maintain composure. Mrs. Reynolds, I'm not sure what you mean, she says, voice level. Sarah attended an after-school art session, but we simply... Mildred cuts her off with a snarl. I know what you're doing, she hisses. You're filling her with nonsense. My niece is a difficult child. She makes up stories. I won't have you meddling in our family business. Ms. Parker feels a surge of protectiveness. She's been through a lot, Ms. Parker says quietly. We only want to help her. Mildred's face tightens, a flicker of desperation in her eyes. Help, she scoffs. Sarah doesn't need your pity. If I hear one more word about abuse, I'll have you fired for slander. And you can forget about that art nonsense. Sarah won't be staying after school again. The confrontation escalates, voices carrying down the corridor. A security guard steps in, asking them to lower their voices. Mildred glares at Ms. Parker one last time before stalking off. Ms. Parker's hands shake, anger and fear rising in equal measure. She wonders what retribution might await Sarah at home. She rushes to find Mr. Lee, breathless with alarm. "We need to move fast," Ms. Parker says, explaining Aunt Mildred's tirade. Mr. Lee's face pales. He accompanies Ms. Parker to the principal's office, where they relay the incident. The principal, a careful man named Mr. Grant, looks troubled. He advises contacting the authorities again, but notes that without direct evidence of abuse, it becomes a battle of allegations. That day, Sarah is absent from class. Panic clenches Ms. Parker's stomach. She dials Aunt Mildred's number repeatedly, but no one answers. Mr. Lee does the same. The sense of dread intensifies as the hours pass without any sign of Sarah. Ms. Parker thinks of that haunted expression, the bruises, and wonders if Aunt Mildred has taken drastic measures. Desperate, Ms. Parker calls Jennings, the retired officer, explaining the urgency. "Can you do a welfare check or something?" she pleads. Jennings agrees to make some calls to his contacts in the local police department. By evening, Ms. Parker receives an update. The authorities, accompanied by a social worker, forced entry into Aunt Mildred's house after repeated knocking went unanswered. They found Sarah locked in her bedroom, crying, with a half-packed suitcase on the bed. Mildred insisted they were moving for a fresh start, but that explanation fell on skeptical ears. The police discovered suspicious paperwork, ledgers detailing large sums of money from life insurance, partially shredded documents referencing the inheritance. It was enough to take Sarah into immediate protective custody, pending an investigation. When Ms. Parker learns this news, a wave of relief and worry hits her in equal measure. She calls Mr. Lee to share the update. "Sarah is safe," Ms. Parker says, barely able to contain her emotions. "They've got her out of that house." Mr. Lee exhales loudly. "Thank God. I'll let the principal know. And hopefully, this time they find enough evidence to keep her away from that woman." The next morning, Ms. Parker rushes to school, eager for any additional news. She discovers that Sarah spent the night with a temporary foster family. The plan is for her to meet with a social worker and possibly speak to investigators. Ms. Parker wants to see Sarah, to reassure her, but she must wait for permission. Midway through the day, she gets a call from a social worker named Ms. Dawson, who invites her to come by the Child Services office and speak with Sarah in a controlled environment. When Ms. Parker arrives, she finds Sarah sitting in a small waiting room, knees drawn up under her chin. The child's face brightens slightly at the sight of her teacher. Ms. Parker crosses the room, kneels down. "I'm so glad you're safe," she murmurs, wanting to wrap her arms around Sarah but waiting for a cue. Sarah looks up with tears in her eyes. "I was so scared," she whispers. "They broke down the door." Aunt Mildred was screaming. Ms. Parker gently reaches for her hand. "You never have to go back there," she says firmly. "The police found evidence of her wrongdoing. You're under protection now." Sarah's chin trembles. "What if they make me go to some group home far away?" she asks. "I don't want to lose my school, or you, or Mr. Lee." Ms. Parker's heart aches. She thinks of the lonely group homes she has heard about, the overwhelmed foster system. "There are good foster families," Ms. Parker says, but a part of her hates the thought of Sarah bouncing from place to place. She swallows hard, an idea forming in her mind. "If you'd like, I could speak to Child Services about fostering you myself, at least for now. I have the space. And I can make sure you stay at the same school." Sarah's eyes widen. "You do that," she breathes. Ms. Parker squeezes her hand. "Only if you want me to. It might take some paperwork, but I'd like to. I care about you, Sarah." Tears spill down Sarah's cheeks, and for a moment, she cannot speak. Finally, she nods, voice trembling with a flicker of hope. "I'd like that." Ms. Parker stands, her chest filling with determination. She confers with Ms. Dawson, the social worker, who explains the process. Ms. Parker has never fostered a child before, but she is ready to navigate the bureaucracy for Sarah's sake. Mr. Lee also steps in, offering references and explaining to the Child Services Office that Ms. Parker has been a respected teacher for decades. Over the next few days, Ms. Parker's life turns into a whirlwind of forms and home inspections. She stocks her guest bedroom with fresh sheets, places a small desk in the corner for Sarah to draw on, and anxiously tidies every inch of the house. By the time the official approval comes through, Ms. Parker feels both exhausted and triumphant. She picks Sarah up from the temporary foster placement and drives her home. As they pull into Ms. Parker's driveway, Sarah looks uncertain, gripping the handle of her backpack. "You're sure you want me here?" she asks in a shaky tone. Ms. Parker nods. 100% sure. This is your home now, for as long as you need it. Stepping inside, Sarah glances around the living room, taking in the tidy shelves lined with novels, the crocheted blankets draped over the couch, the faint scent of lavender that always reminds Ms. Parker of her mother. Sarah's eyes linger on a cozy armchair by the window. "It's so quiet," she says softly. Ms. Parker smiles. "I like peace," she says, "but I also like company. You'll liven things up." Sarah sets her bag down. Ms. Parker shows her the guest room, painted a soft lilac color. A small bookshelf stands against one wall, stocked with children's novels. A vase of fresh flowers brightens the desk. Sarah stares, speechless. "I hope you like it," Ms. Parker says, suddenly nervous. "If you want to change anything, paint color, decorations, let me know." Sarah sets her sketchbook on the desk. "It's perfect," she murmurs, eyes welling with tears. "No one's ever done something like this for me." Ms. Parker's own eyes grow misty. She gently places a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You matter, Sarah. Get some rest, okay? We can talk more in the morning." Sarah nods, hugging her arms around herself. Ms. Parker leaves her to settle in, heart aching with a mixture of sympathy and warmth. She hopes this will be the beginning of a better life for Sarah. Meanwhile, the investigation against Aunt Mildred intensifies. Detectives find more incriminating evidence. Correspondences referencing an inheritance, half-burned letters that suggest Mildred had a motive to control whatever money was left to Sarah after her parents' death. Mr. Lee hears from Jennings that certain documents may tie Mildred to the couple's mysterious accident. Word circulates that the parents had been working on some sort of valuable invention or patent, though no one can confirm the details yet. One evening, Ms. Parker and Sarah sit at the kitchen table, finishing a modest dinner of spaghetti and salad. Ms. Parker clears the plates, noticing Sarah's pensive silence. She gently prompts, "You've been quiet tonight. Everything all right?" Sarah laces her fingers together. "I'm okay," she says. "It's just that the detectives want me to talk about my parents' crash, about Aunt Mildred. I barely remember that night. I was only 10. Ms. Parker sits beside her, voice soothing. "What do you recall?" Sarah closes her eyes. "I remember my parents arguing with Aunt Mildred earlier that week, something about money. Dad said Aunt Mildred was greedy, that she couldn't keep demanding from him. I overheard them shouting. I was scared, but I didn't think it would lead to the crash." Tears prick Ms. Parker's eyes. She places a gentle hand over Sarah's. Detective Ramirez wants to piece together the timeline. It might help them prove Aunt Mildred was involved somehow. Sarah's voice quivers. "Do you think she killed them?" Ms. Parker feels her chest tighten. "I don't know," she says softly. "But if there's any possibility she caused their accident, the truth needs to come out." Sarah nods, tears rolling down her cheeks. Ms. Parker hugs her, rubbing her back in small circles. "You're not alone in this," Ms. Parker murmurs. "We'll face it together." Days stretch into weeks as the investigation gathers momentum. The authorities formally charge Mildred with fraud and child endangerment, pending further evidence about the parents' death. Mildred, through her lawyer, claims Sarah is lying, that Ms. Parker manipulated her. The tension in town grows. A few people whisper that Ms. Parker is meddling, while others quietly cheer her on for stepping up. During this time, Sarah begins to adjust to life in Ms. Parker's home. She still has nightmares, thrashing in bed until Ms. Parker rushes in, comforting her with soft words. Sometimes Sarah apologizes tearfully, worried that Ms. Parker will regret taking her in. Each time, Ms. Parker reassures her that she belongs here, that she is wanted. Mr. Lee visits one evening, bringing a casserole and a stack of coloring books for Sarah. They chat about the ongoing case. Jennings called, Mr. Lee says. He said they've uncovered more about that patent Sarah's father was working on. Something to do with sustainable energy, apparently. A major company was on the verge of signing a deal with him. If that's true, the payout could have been huge. Ms. Parker glances at Sarah, who eavesdrops from the doorway. Ms. Parker beckons her closer. This might be painful to hear, Ms. Parker tells her gently, but it's important we know the full story. Sarah steps forward, hugging a pillow to her chest. So Aunt Mildred might have wanted that money? She asks. Mr. Lee nods solemnly. It's possible. If your parents' death was no accident, she might have been trying to gain control of any financial windfall. Sarah's face pales. But what if she gets away with it? Ms. Parker exhales. We won't let that happen. Detective Ramirez is building a strong case. They're even subpoenaing records from the patent office. Sarah sinks into the couch, eyes distant. I hope it's enough, she says. School continues, providing a semblance of normalcy for Sarah. She still struggles with trust, but Ms. Parker's steady support helps her open up bit by bit. One day, Sarah brings Ms. Parker a drawing, a bright scene of a teacher and a girl smiling under a tree. This is for you, Sarah says timidly. Ms. Parker's eyes fill with gratitude. Thank you, Sarah. It's beautiful, she says, meaning it with all her heart. She frames it and hangs it by her dining table. But not all is calm. One afternoon, Ms. Parker notices a dark sedan idling across the street from her house. When she peers out the window, the car drives off quickly. She reports it to the police, fearing it might be someone connected to Mildred. Detective Ramirez advises caution. Keep your doors locked, she warns. Mildred might have associates who want to scare you. That night, Ms. Parker double-checks every window, heart pounding. She can't help but worry about Sarah's safety. Sarah, sensing Ms. Parker's anxiety, silently helps stack furniture near the back door. Ms. Parker tries to make light of it, saying they're just being cautious, but the undercurrent of fear lingers. As the case heads toward a preliminary hearing, a startling development emerges. New evidence that the brakes on the Denton's car may have been tampered with. An automotive expert finds unusual patterns of wear on the brake pads, suggesting sabotage. The discovery hits the local news, fueling speculation that Mildred orchestrated the crash. Sarah sees the headlines in the paper and goes pale. I can't believe it, she whispers, tears forming. Ms. Parker hugs her. It's awful, she agrees. But at least it might prove your parents' death wasn't just a tragic accident. Sarah nods, her eyes hollow. That means she really did kill them, she says in a broken voice. All for money. Ms. Parker's heart aches. She holds Sarah as the girl sobs, mourning her parents all over again. That night, Sarah confides in Ms. Parker, I keep thinking about how I survived the crash. I was in the back seat, sleeping, and I woke up in the hospital. Aunt Mildred was the first person I saw. She told me I was lucky to be alive and that I'd better listen to her if I wanted to stay that way. Ms. Parker shudders, imagining the fear Sarah must have endured. You don't ever have to listen to her threats again, Ms. Parker says firmly. She can't hurt you now. Detective Ramirez calls Ms. Parker, requesting a statement from Sarah about any memories from the night of the crash or the days leading up to it. Ms. Parker broaches the subject with Sarah, who chews her lip nervously. I'll try, she says. But sometimes it all blurs together. A few days later, they head to the police station. Sarah sits in a small, windowless interview room with Ms. Parker by her side and Detective Ramirez across the table. Ramirez has kind eyes and speaks gently. Sarah, she begins, anything you can recall might help us build the case? Sarah takes a shaky breath, glancing at Ms. Parker for reassurance. My dad was excited about something, a new battery design. I remember him saying it would change everything. Aunt Mildred came over. She was yelling at him about how he owed her a share. My mom told her to leave, said we didn't need her negativity. Aunt Mildred stormed out, screaming that we'd all be sorry. Sarah's voice trembles as she continues. Then, a few nights later, my parents were driving home from dinner. I was in the back seat. I heard my dad say the brakes felt funny. My mom told him to slow down, but then everything went fuzzy. The car spun, I think. I woke up in the hospital, and Aunt Mildred was there, telling me they were gone. Detective Ramirez nods, scribbling notes. Thank you, Sarah. That helps. Sarah's tears slip silently down her cheeks. Ms. Parker hands her a tissue. When the interview finishes, Ramirez gives Sarah a small, encouraging smile. You're very brave, she says. The preliminary hearing arrives. Ms. Parker and Sarah, accompanied by Mr. Lee, sit in the gallery. Mildred, looking gaunt and angry, appears in a prisoner's uniform, flanked by lawyers. The prosecution lays out some of the evidence: the financial records, life insurance payouts, brake tampering. Mildred's defense tries to dismiss the accusations as wild theories fueled by a child's imagination and a teacher with a personal agenda. Sarah trembles, tears in her eyes as she listens to the defense twist her statements. During a recess, Ms. Parker takes Sarah aside. It's upsetting to hear them speak like that, Ms. Parker says gently. But remember, the truth is on our side. Sarah sniffles. I know. It's just hard, seeing her again. She glares at me like she wants to hurt me. Ms. Parker strokes her hair. She can't. You're safe now. The judge finds enough probable cause to proceed with a full trial, to the relief of Ms. Parker and Sarah. Mildred is denied bail due to the severity of the allegations and the risk she might flee. Sarah exhales shakily, leaning into Ms. Parker's embrace. As the weeks progress, Sarah slowly adjusts to her new routine in Ms. Parker's home. She attends school regularly, her grades improving. She joins an after-school art club, where she makes tentative friendships with other students who share her passion. Ms. Parker sees glimpses of the imaginative girl Sarah must have been before tragedy struck. Curious, creative, with a wry sense of humor that emerges in small doses. One evening, Ms. Parker finds Sarah in the living room, flipping through an old photo album of Ms. Parker's. Sarah pauses on a picture of Ms. Parker with a younger woman, Ms. Parker's daughter who passed away in her 20s after a long illness. Who's this? Sarah asks gently. Ms. Parker's expression softens with sadness. That's my daughter, Margaret. She died years ago. I miss her every day. Sarah's eyes brim with empathy. I'm sorry, she whispers. It must hurt a lot. Ms. Parker nods. It does. But taking care of you helps me heal a bit. Makes me feel like I can still make a difference in a child's life. Sarah reaches for Ms. Parker's hand, giving it a soft squeeze. You do, she says. You've made all the difference for me. They share a quiet moment of understanding. Both have lost loved ones, both carry grief in different shapes. It becomes a bond that draws them closer. Ms. Parker tucks Sarah in at night, reading from chapter books and enjoying the small routines that form a sense of family. Each day, Sarah grows more comfortable, sometimes even laughing at Ms. Parker's corny jokes. Meanwhile, the detectives keep digging. They discover emails between Mildred and a potential investor, suggesting she planned to claim any intellectual property rights to Sarah's father's invention. The more they find, the stronger the case becomes. The news spreads through the community. Once considered a simple car accident, it now appears to be a deliberate act orchestrated by a greedy relative. Ms. Parker worries about the stress on Sarah. The child has nightmares about the crash, and sometimes about Mildred confronting her in the shadows. When these bad dreams strike, Sarah slips out of her room, tapping on Ms. Parker's door. Ms. Parker invites her in, letting her curl up with a blanket on the couch. They talk in hushed voices about anything calming: nature documentaries, art club. Eventually, Sarah's trembling subsides, and Ms. Parker walks her back to bed. School staff notice the improvement in Sarah's demeanor, but also remain vigilant. Mr. Lee meets with Sarah weekly, offering therapy sessions. She reveals bits of the trauma she endured: locked doors, withheld food, harsh words. "She said I was worthless," Sarah whispers, her voice thick with tears. "She said I should have died in the crash instead of my parents." Mr. Lee gently reassures her. "That was cruelty, Sarah, not truth," he says. "You survived because you deserved a chance at life, and we're so glad you did." The day of the trial approaches. Prosecutors brace Sarah for the possibility that she may need to testify about the abuse she suffered. Ms. Parker tries to prepare her emotionally, but it is a tall order for an 11-year-old. "Will I have to see her?" Sarah asks, fear in her eyes. "Yes," Ms. Parker says quietly. "But we'll be right there. You'll have a chance to tell everyone what happened." Sarah shudders, tears threatening. Ms. Parker hugs her. "I know it's terrifying, but you're brave," Ms. Parker says. "You've already come this far." Trial day dawns cloudy and cold. Ms. Parker dresses in her best navy blazer, wanting to project calm for Sarah's sake. They arrive at the courthouse, greeted by Mr. Lee and Detective Ramirez. Reporters lurk outside, hungry for any snippet of the sensational story: a supposed murder-for-profit scheme, an abused child, an inheritance dispute. Ms. Parker shields Sarah from the flashing cameras as they hurry inside. The courtroom feels stark: polished wooden pews, an imposing judge's bench, the sound of rustling papers. Mildred sits at the defense table, wearing a prim blouse, her hair pulled back. She spares one venomous glare at Sarah before turning to consult with her lawyer. Sarah pales, clinging to Ms. Parker's hand. "Don't look at her," Ms. Parker whispers. "Focus on me if you feel scared." Opening statements lay out the prosecution's argument. Mildred orchestrated the accident, manipulated the inheritance, and abused Sarah to keep her quiet. The defense counters that Sarah's father's crash was a random tragedy, and that Mildred only tried to discipline an unruly child. Ms. Parker feels anger simmer in her chest at the blatant lies. Detective Ramirez testifies about the brake tampering and suspicious emails. The automotive expert describes the anomalies in the car's braking system. Jennings, the retired officer, recounts the early rumors surrounding the accident. Mr. Lee speaks about Sarah's condition at school: the bruises, the fear, the neglected appearance. Each testimony weaves a tapestry of deception and cruelty, pointing straight at Mildred. Finally, Sarah is called to the stand. She walks up with trembling legs, Ms. Parker nodding in silent encouragement from the gallery. Sarah is sworn in, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. The prosecutor approaches gently, asking about life with Aunt Mildred. Sarah's voice shakes, but she manages to describe the locked doors, the bruises, the hateful words. Then the questioning shifts to the parents' death. "What do you remember about the days before the crash?" the prosecutor asks softly. Sarah takes a shaky breath. "Aunt Mildred came over. She argued with my dad about a battery invention. She said she deserved a cut of the money, or else. My mom told her to leave us alone. Aunt Mildred yelled that we'd regret it." "Thank you, Sarah," the prosecutor says. "And after the crash?" Sarah's eyes fill with tears. "I woke up in the hospital. Aunt Mildred told me my parents were dead. She said if I told anyone about the arguments, she'd make my life miserable. She said I was lucky she was taking care of me, or I'd have nowhere to go." Ms. Parker fights tears, watching the heartbreaking sight of this little girl forced to recall every traumatic detail. The defense tries to discredit Sarah, implying she is confused, that she was too young to recall events clearly. Sarah's voice falters. She glances at Ms. Parker, who gives her a small nod of reassurance. "I'm not lying," Sarah says, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I loved my parents, and now they're gone." A hush falls over the courtroom. Mildred fidgets at the defense table, her lawyers stammering objections. The judge overrules them. When Sarah steps down, Ms. Parker rushes to her side. "You did so well," Ms. Parker whispers, hugging her. "I'm proud of you." Over the next few days, more evidence is presented. The half-burned letters from Mildred referencing easy money, the suspicious deposit of the insurance checks, the statements from neighbors who overheard shouting matches. The defense grows increasingly desperate. In closing arguments, the prosecution paints a damning picture of a relative driven by greed, willing to kill her own family and terrorize a child to keep secrets hidden. The defense pleads for leniency, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Then comes the jury's deliberation, a nerve-wracking wait. Sarah stays home from school, too shaken to face curious classmates. Ms. Parker remains with her, trying to keep her calm with puzzles and art projects. The phone call finally arrives. The jury has reached a verdict. They gather in the courtroom again. Mildred stands, face drained of color, as the foreman announces the verdict. Guilty on multiple counts: fraud, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit murder. The hush explodes into murmurs as the judge thanks the jury. Mildred's eyes widen in fury and disbelief. She shouts something unintelligible before the bailiff leads her away. Sarah tenses as Mildred shoots her a final venomous glare, but Ms. Parker holds her tight. Outside, the media cluster for statements. The prosecutor briefly addresses them, calling it a victory for justice. Ms. Parker hustles Sarah into a waiting car, tears streaming down the girl's face. "It's over," Ms. Parker murmurs, voice shaky with relief. "She can't hurt you anymore." Sarah sobs quietly, a mixture of grief and release. "I can't believe it," she whispers. "She won't ever come back?" "No," Ms. Parker says, stroking Sarah's hair. "She'll be in prison for a long time." In the ensuing days, final legal steps confirm that Ms. Parker will remain Sarah's guardian, pending an adoption if both choose that path. Sarah's inheritance, once siphoned by Mildred, is recovered by the authorities. Sarah is too young to manage it on her own, but it is placed in a trust for her future. Ms. Parker helps her navigate the aftermath, going to therapy sessions, addressing lingering nightmares. The entire ordeal has left deep scars, but Sarah no longer walks with the weight of constant fear. One Saturday, Sarah rearranges her new bedroom. She hangs fresh drawings on the walls, no longer the dark, haunted images she used to create, but bright sketches of flowers, sunny fields, portraits of Ms. Parker, Mr. Lee, and even a small ghost-like outline that might represent her parents watching over her. Ms. Parker hovers in the doorway, smiling. "Your art is changing," Ms. Parker remarks. Sarah nods, a soft smile on her lips. "I guess I don't feel so trapped anymore. Painting something hopeful feels right." Ms. Parker's eyes mist. "I'm so proud of you," she whispers. "You've been so brave." Sarah sets down her pencil, turning to face Ms. Parker. "If you still want to, foster me for a long time, or adopt me," she says hesitantly, "I'd like that. I don't ever want to leave." Ms. Parker steps forward, hugging her. "I'd like that too," she says, tears in her eyes. "You have a home with me always." Over the next few weeks, Ms. Parker meets with an adoption attorney. They fill out forms, schedule a home evaluation, and gather letters of reference. Mr. Lee happily writes one, describing Ms. Parker's nurturing spirit and Sarah's remarkable improvement under her care. The principal, Mr. Grant, also chimes in, praising Ms. Parker's dedication to her students. The day the adoption is finalized, Ms. Parker and Sarah walk out of the courthouse hand in hand, official paperwork in Ms. Parker's purse. Ms. Parker feels a surge of emotion, recalling how this journey began with a single bruise on a frightened girl's wrist. Sarah beams, though tears slip down her cheeks. "I have a mom again," she whispers, clinging to Ms. Parker's arm. Ms. Parker strokes Sarah's hair, voice trembling. "You've had one in spirit for a while now." Life moves on in happier rhythms. Sarah's new routine involves feeding Ms. Parker's old cat, Thomas, every morning. She catches the bus with friends, returns home to a snack Ms. Parker prepares, then works on homework. Sometimes she paints at the kitchen table while Ms. Parker flips through a novel or grades papers. They chat about art club, Sarah's progress in math, and weekend plans. Each ordinary moment feels precious after the turmoil they survived. Sarah's nightmares diminish, though now and then she wakes in the night, anxious and sweaty. Ms. Parker is always there, calming her with gentle words. They talk about Sarah's parents, visiting their graves on a sunny afternoon. Sarah places flowers and a small drawing on the headstones, tears glistening in her eyes. "I wish they were here," she murmurs. "But I'm glad I have you now." Ms. Parker's throat tightens. "I'm sure they're proud of you," she says gently. A local detective stops by occasionally with updates, final sentencing for Mildred, further details about the patent that Sarah's father never got to finish. The trust is growing, and Ms. Parker vows to ensure Sarah can use those funds for college one day, or whatever life path she chooses. For now, Sarah is content to be a normal sixth grader, forging friendships and discovering new hobbies. Toward the end of the school year, Sarah's art club hosts an exhibit, displaying each student's best work. Ms. Parker attends, brimming with pride. Sarah's piece is a vibrant painting of two silhouettes, one taller, one smaller, standing in a sunlit meadow, holding hands. The smaller figure has a paintbrush, trailing colors across the grass. There is warmth and light in every brushstroke. A plaque beneath the painting reads, "Finding Hope." Ms. Parker feels tears threaten as she gazes at it. Sarah appears at her side, chewing her lip. "Is it okay?" Sarah asks shyly. "I tried to show how I felt since moving in with you." Ms. Parker puts an arm around her. "It's more than okay," she says softly. "It's beautiful. I love it." The exhibit ends with applause for all the young artists, and Ms. Parker notices Sarah beaming as classmates congratulate her. It's a transformation from the frightened child Ms. Parker first encountered. Sarah still carries sorrow over her parents and the trauma inflicted by Mildred, but she has found the courage to trust again, to hope. That alone, Ms. Parker thinks, is a triumph beyond measure. On a warm, sunny morning a few weeks later, Ms. Parker and Sarah set up a small art station in the backyard. The garden is alive with blooming flowers and buzzing bees. Sarah hums as she arranges her brushes. Ms. Parker brings out lemonade, smiling. "What are you painting today?" she asks. Sarah glances around at the colorful blooms. "Maybe the garden," she says, "but with a twist. I might add in some magical creatures, just for fun." Ms. Parker chuckles, delight filling her heart. "I can't wait to see it," she replies. She sits down beside Sarah, flipping through a magazine while Sarah focuses on her canvas. Every so often, Ms. Parker sneaks a glance at the girl's expression, peaceful, intent on creation. Gone is the terror that once haunted her eyes. They spend the afternoon like that, chatting, painting, sipping lemonade. Thomas the cat lounges nearby, purring in the sunshine. Ms. Parker reflects on how drastically her life changed when she noticed that bruise on Sarah's wrist. What began as suspicion grew into a fierce need to protect a vulnerable child. Along the way, Ms. Parker found a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. As evening falls, Ms. Parker and Sarah head indoors, placing the half-finished painting in a safe corner. While they eat dinner, Sarah excitedly talks about a future project, a mural for the school's hallway, featuring cheerful scenes of nature. "Mr. Lee said I might be able to help design it," she says with a shy smile. "That's wonderful," Ms. Parker replies. "You have so much talent, Sarah. It's good to see you using it for something that brings people joy." Sarah glances at Ms. Parker, gratitude in her eyes. "I wouldn't be here without you," she says softly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Ms. Parker reaches across the table, clasping Sarah's hand. "You're the brave one," she says. "But I'm glad I could help." Time marches on, the seasons shifting. Sarah enters 7th grade, thriving under Ms. Parker's guardianship. Her once scraggly hair is healthy and neat, her clothes fit better, and her eyes no longer brim with perpetual dread. She laughs with friends, organizes a small art fundraiser for the school library, and tries out for the track team, discovering a surprising burst of speed in her legs. She has come a long way from that fearful child who hid in a supply closet. On the anniversary of her parents' death, Sarah grows subdued again, memories stirring. Ms. Parker plans a small remembrance, driving Sarah to the spot where the accident occurred. They stand near the bend in the road, a small cross marking the place. Sarah holds flowers, tears glistening as she lays them gently by the marker. "I miss you," she whispers, voice cracking. "But I'm doing okay now. I hope you can see that." Ms. Parker wraps an arm around her shoulders, offering silent support. It is a somber moment, but also one of healing, as though Sarah is finding closure amid the whispers of wind through the trees. Then they drive to the cemetery, where Sarah's parents are buried, leaving more flowers and a sketch of a bright sunrise. "It's how I imagine them now," Sarah explains. "In the light." Later, back home, Miss Parker puts on the kettle for tea, and Sarah picks at a few cookies. "I feel lighter," Sarah says. "Like finally I can say goodbye to the worst parts of the past." Miss Parker smiles, eyes warm. "That's good," she says softly. "I'm proud of you." Another year passes, full of everyday joys and challenges. Sarah's nightmares become rare, her confidence growing. She starts teaching younger kids in the art club how to blend colors, beaming when they admire her skill. Ms. Parker, meanwhile, transitions out of substitute teaching to focus on supporting Sarah, though she still volunteers at the school. The adoption is now a long-settled reality, with Sarah calling Ms. Parker Mom more often than not, though the word still carries a tinge of bittersweetness. One sunny weekend, Ms. Parker and Sarah host a small barbecue in the backyard, inviting Mr. Lee, Detective Ramirez, Officer Jennings, and a few neighbors. It's a low-key celebration of how far Sarah has come. The smell of grilled chicken and fresh lemonade wafts through the yard. Sarah proudly shows her latest drawings to Jennings, who marvels at her improvement. Detective Ramirez clinks glasses in a toast, "To justice served and a bright future for Sarah," she proclaims. Sarah grins, cheeks flushing. "I still can't believe how much my life has changed," she says, glancing around at the friendly faces gathered. She spots Ms. Parker at the grill, expertly flipping burgers. "I used to think no one cared. Now I see so many people who do." Mr. Lee pats Sarah's shoulder. "You've always been worth caring about," he says. "You just needed a chance to see it." As dusk settles, Miss Parker and Sarah linger outside, the guests gone. Fireflies blink in the garden. Sarah sets her sketchbook on the patio table, doodling the flickering lights. Miss Parker sips tea, feeling gratitude wash over her. This child, once locked in a room and told she was cursed, is now finding her place in the world. Eventually, they go inside. Ms. Parker dims the living room lights, and Sarah heads to her room. Before she disappears, she calls out, "Mom? Good night. I love you." Ms. Parker's heart nearly bursts. "I love you too, sweetheart," she replies, voice thick with emotion. When Sarah's door closes, Ms. Parker takes a moment to gather herself, recalling every step of this journey. The first day she saw that bruise, the painful discoveries, the confrontations in court, and the final verdict that freed Sarah from Aunt Mildred's control. She sits on the couch, tears slipping down her cheeks, but they are tears of relief and gratitude. In her mind, she thanks her late daughter for guiding her toward a life that still held meaning. Fate, or coincidence, brought Sarah into her classroom, but it is love and persistence that brought her here, safe at home. A few nights later, Ms. Parker finds Sarah in her room, carefully arranging a new set of drawings on the wall. They depict a story-like sequence, a small figure standing in the shadows, approached by a guiding hand, then led into a field of sunlight. "I wanted something to remind me," Sarah says, noticing Ms. Parker's presence. "Remind you of what?" Ms. Parker asks gently. "That we can leave the shadows behind," Sarah replies, her eyes shining. "We don't have to stay in the dark forever." Ms. Parker's heart warms. She nods. "That's right," she whispers. "You've shown so much courage, Sarah." They stand together, silent, absorbing the images. Then they share a fleeting smile, a quiet understanding. This is their life now, a tapestry woven from sorrow and hope, from pain and resilience. In it, they have found a bond that neither time nor tragedy can break. One final day dawns, bright and full of promise. Ms. Parker gets a call from the local library, inviting Sarah to showcase her artwork in a children's corner. Sarah, elated, accepts. They spend the afternoon selecting some of her best pieces. Ms. Parker helps frame them with care. Then, as the sun sets, they carry the framed drawings to the library, receiving warm smiles from the staff. Sarah giggles, cheeks flushed with pride, as she arranges them on an exhibit wall. They title it Hope Through Art. Stepping back, Ms. Parker slips an arm around Sarah's shoulders. Sarah leans her head against Ms. Parker. "I think they look perfect," she says softly. "They do," Ms. Parker replies, voice thick with emotion. "Just like you." They head home, the twilight sky painted in lavender and orange. Ms. Parker watches Sarah skip a little on the sidewalk, a far cry from the trembling child who once cowered at every adult's approach. A sense of peace settles over Ms. Parker's soul, and she breathes in the cool evening air. Back at the house, they settle in for the night. Sarah disappears into her bedroom, presumably to sketch or read before bed. Ms. Parker tidies the kitchen, humming a quiet tune. She thinks about how tomorrow is just another day. No drama, no court appearances, no fear of what Aunt Mildred might do. For Sarah, it is a new chapter, one that belongs solely to her. Before turning in, Ms. Parker peeks into Sarah's room. The girl is bent over her sketchbook, headphones on, lost in a world of soft music. Ms. Parker sees the open pages of the sketchbook, images of flowers, warm scenes of laughter and safety. Sarah glances up, smiles, and pulls off her headphones. "Good night, Mom," she says, voice full of affection. Ms. Parker feels her throat tighten. "Good night, my sweet girl." "Sleep well," she replies. She closes the door gently, stepping into the hallway with tears of gratitude in her eyes. In the hush of that moment, she understands that life is a tapestry of light and shadow, and they have finally stepped together into the light. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already and subscribe for more.